My name is Michael White. I am your lobbyist this session. I guess I'll give a little introduction of me. So I am a lobbyist for the Washington State Council of Firefighters. I'm an in-house lobbyist, so that's the only group that I lobby for besides you guys. I've been doing this this is my 6th legislative session, so 5 years in the books. And my organization represents the roughly 8,500 firefighters, paramedics, public employee fire investigators of career firefighters, that is, of Washington State. And actually, I'm also an active firefighter. I work in Auburn at the Valley Regional Fire Authority, but during legislative session, I come down to Olympia and work on behalf of our organization full time. So
that's cool. I don't know that everybody realizes you could do both, be a full-time, have a regular job, and be a legislator.
Yeah, it's pretty difficult. It's not an easy thing for sure. But I think part of the difference with just kind of the structure of being a firefighter, I work 24-hour shifts. So it's a concentrated work period. But so I'll work 2 days a week, 2 24-hour shifts a week, and then have days off to do other work. And a lot of firefighters actually have kind of second jobs. So this is my second job, basically.
You do it all year round then?
As far as firefighting or lobbying, well, I mean both. Yes. Outside of legislative session, I have stuff that goes on behalf of the State Council of Firefighters. So we have educational conferences. We have our convention. We're a democratic organization. So our members get together for a few days once a year and kind of set the policy and the organizational drive for what we do. And my organization kind of has 3 primary functions. It's for political action, political and legislative action, education of our members, and public relations. And then, so I have stuff that goes on throughout the year that works to address those.
All right. Do we have any questions you want to about being a lobbyist that you might ask? Huh?
Our old lobbyist.
Yeah, we had Mike Burgess come in.
Okay.
He spoke with them a little bit about what he does. Could you just kind of share maybe a little bit about what's like an average day for you down there?
Yeah, and the legislative session kind of varies. So right now, it's the first week of legislative session, and everybody is trying to get their bills introduced. It's kind of a committee time, so the legislators break out into their policy committees and talk about the different bills in kind of a more focused group. Committees can range from 5 members up to 25 members, kind of depending on the policy area. For example, I typically work within in the House. It's the Labor and Workplace Standards Committee. And in the Senate, it's the Labor and Commerce Committee. My kind of portfolio, I work on firefighter health issues. So I focus on making sure that firefighters have good protections in their job should they be injured or get sick from our job. And that's not necessarily the exclusive policy areas that I work on, but I also work on like one of the bills that I'm working on getting sponsored right now is dealing with foam that we use, that we're finding that it has some toxic chemicals in it, and firefighters have to work with this firsthand, and we're getting sick because of it, and so we're looking at trying to phase that foam out. So in that case, that will probably go to the Environmental Committee in the House and the Energy, Environment, and Telecommunications Committee in the Senate. So that's a whole different set of legislators that I have to work with, and those are theoretically the experts of those policies. And so right now, up until I think it's February 2nd, legislators will be working within these committees, listening to the bills, so that they have the way it works is they have a public hearing where people can come and testify and speak, why they're in favor or why they're opposed to the bill. And then the committees will vote out the bills through what they call executive session. And you can go and listen to the legislators debate the bills. And then at that point, it's referred to either another committee. If it's got very big fiscal impacts, it'll go to a committee that deals with spending money. So in the House, that's either the appropriations, that's the committee that works on spending the money. And then there's the House Finance Committee, and that's the committee that works on raising the money. So what are the taxes that should be levied? In the Senate, those two committees are rolled into one called the Ways and Means Committee. So they'll consider it if it's got a significant expense, and then after that, it goes to the Rules Committee, and basically we work on trying to make it eligible to be voted on by the entire chamber, whether it's the Senate or the House, depending on where the bill is. So right now that's kind of a day in life of my job. So I'm working on educating legislators so that they may either be the prime sponsor of the bill, meaning they are the ones that bringing it forward, or co-sponsoring the bill, trying to get the bills heard in the committee. So working with the committee chairs so that they give the bill a public hearing so we can go speak to them about it. And then working on getting the bills voted out of it. So yeah, that's kind of the day in life right now.
What were you going to ask, Henry? What was that question?
Is it mandatory for firefighters to be in the union when you're in Washington State?
It's not mandatory. So we have, the way it works is when you are hired as a firefighter, almost all fire departments that have 3 career firefighters or more have a firefighters union. So almost unanimously, not completely, but almost all of them sign up to be a member of the union. There is a process called an agency fee payer, where that you don't have to be a member of the union, but you have to pay a portion of your typical union dues for the union to represent you. And so us as union members, or us as the union, we have to, as by law, we have to represent all employees, not just our members, but all employees in both contract negotiations. So when we're looking at our pay, our working conditions, our hours, that kind of stuff. And also if an employee gets in trouble, we have a duty to fairly represent our members and our non-members. And so because we're mandated to represent everybody, a portion of the what we call union dues, these non-members have to pay. So that's, we call them agency fee pay. And there's actually a pretty big Supreme Court case. We've been kind of working on the Supreme Court case for the past few years, but there's a Supreme Court case coming up called Janus that would that deals with freedom of speech. And the plaintiff, basically Janus, and I can't remember their first name, is saying that they are being forcibly against their free speech to forcibly associate with a union when they don't want to. And so the Supreme Court is going to be hearing this, I think, right now, sometime very soon, and then likely coming to a decision. And I think for those of us in the labor movement, we fully expect, with a conservative Supreme Court like that we have, we fully expect this agency fee payer program to go away. That people will no longer have to pay a portion of union dues for representation, yet the union will still have to represent.
Do you know, do you know about like any of the other like major bills or controversial bills that are being kind of introduced right now or debated right now?
Yeah, there's a bunch of them out there. So kind of some political background. For the past 5 years, we've had a divided legislature. That means the House has been controlled by Democrats and the Senate has been controlled by Republicans. Technically speaking, that the Senate has actually, there's more Democrats than Republicans over the past 5 years, but two Democrats initially, I think it was in 2013 and 2014, decided to leave their caucus, leave the Democratic caucus in the Senate, and join up with the Republicans, and they formed the Majority Coalition Caucus. And so, as a result, Republicans had control of the Senate, Democrats had control of the House, and so each party kind of had their platform issues that they wanted to move forward, and because they're big issues, they couldn't agree. A lot of these issues kind of stalled for a number of years. In the kind of east side of King County, Redmond, Kirkland area, a Republican senator ended up passing away last year, and I believe it was the year before, and there was a special election last November for that seat, and the Democrat won. So that gave Democratic control to the Senate. So it's 25-24 in the Senate, and in the House it's 50-48. So with kind of unanimous Democratic control in the House, the Senate, and the governor's office, they're actually going to try and, I think, push through a lot of issues that were contentious, but the Democrats view them as must-have. So something like the Voting Rights Act that deals with whether a jurisdiction has adequate representation of the population that they have. So, for example, Yakima went through this on the federal level a couple of years ago. They were finding that their city council, or the plaintiffs of the suit, believed that the city council was not representative of their city. Most of the council members, I believe all the council members, were white. They were from a smaller neighborhood. But Yakima is over 50% Latina. And so that to them, that didn't make sense. They didn't have equal representation. And so they brought a lawsuit in federal court, and it went on for a number of years, but they ended up settling it. And they ended up dividing Yakima into, instead of being an at-large where everybody votes on all, I believe it's 7 of their council members, they went to district elections, kind of like we have with legislature. It'd be like, instead, the current system would be or the previous system in Yakima would be comparable to Washington State. It doesn't make sense that you would vote on all 49 senators in Washington State, and that's why you have a district to represent the community that you're from. So in Yakima, they divided it up into district elections, and then ended up electing a majority-minority city council. So the majority of the members of the city council are now from minority population color. So that's a big issue, bringing a cause to action in Washington State, keeping it out of federal court, that would have jurisdictions be, if they can demonstrate that there is a inadequate representation, then they have a cause for action to basically file suit and ensure that their jurisdiction is representative of their community. There's issues like the carbon tax. So Governor Inslee has been pushing this for a number of years, and it's basically a tax on carbon pollution emitters, and in the thought that they could sell that, they'd have a number of credits and they could sell it across the board and potentially raise revenue there. There's a capital gains tax that looks on when you have investments, certain investments, like take, for example, stock. If you sell over a certain dollar amount of stock in a year, you are taxed on it on the federal level, but you're not taxed on it on the state level. Generally speaking, Republicans are opposed to new taxes, and a lot of people believe that the capital gains tax is income tax. Democrats, however, are basically calling it excise tax or sales tax. It's the tax on the selling of investments, not necessarily on income because of those investments. Both those, both those taxes are very controversial, and even within the Democratic caucuses in the House and the Senate, uh, uh, I'm not optimistic that they'll have enough support to get something like that done. So those are kind of some of the big issues. I know you guys were thinking about tracking the net neutrality issues. I have those bills actually printed up in front of me here. There's two of them that are being heard next week. And so, yeah, that will definitely be an issue on the forefront. And these two bills have wide bipartisan support, at least looking at the sponsors of it. And I anticipate that these bills will move through the legislature. But then there's issues with the federal level. Basically there's federal preemption, meaning Congress can block states and local governments from taking action on things like net neutrality, and I believe that was included in their FCC decision when they rolled back net neutrality.
That a local couldn't take action?
Yeah, I believe, and I'm not, again, this is definitely not my policy expertise, but I believe that they included action that would prevent states and local jurisdictions from being able to take action and block throttling or prevent providers from blocking content. This is something to definitely not quote me on. I need to be more studied on it, but I believe that is the case.
If that was true, then these bills wouldn't do anything.
Well, there's the potential for them to do something. So, these bills could be used as basically a challenge to the federal law. That in some cases, and you'll see a number of bills out there that might not be legal ultimately, but they want to have them introduced to bring them through the courts, and maybe there's a belief that the courts will side on the locals or the states. Take for example, Seattle adopted an income tax, and I'm pretty I think it's pretty clear that within state law, a local jurisdiction can't adopt an income tax. However, City of Seattle, their council wants to be, wants to have more revenue options, and so they've adopted this, and they're going to court over it. And it's possible that the Washington State Supreme Court, assuming that where this case will ultimately end up, will could overturn the notion that a local jurisdiction can't implement an income tax. So sometimes it's just kind of an activist stance of like, hey, we want to fight back against the notion that we can't do something, or that we can do something and we shouldn't be able to do it. So I don't know specifically if that's the intent of these bills, but that'd be a concern, I think, with these bills, is that the feds may not actually allow us from doing this.
What's the difference between both the ones that we have on this list?
So there's really no difference between the two net neutrality bills that are on here, right?
I was looking at them. There's a lot of like the same definitions. There was one section. So in House Bill 2284. Section 2 talks about matters vitally and affecting the public interest, and it references the Consumer Protection Act, which I don't see in the other bill. So that that can the Consumer Protection Act offers up an option by the Attorney General. So the Attorney General could potentially say, hey, if a internet provider decides to do something that blocks content or slows down certain content, that the Attorney General could then take a suit, basically file a lawsuit against that internet provider. So I mean, that's the one thing I'm seeing really in the difference between these two bills.
Is there a reason we have two in the House?
You know, I'm not sure about that. You know, there are a lot of similar co-sponsors on this, and I honestly I don't have a good answer for you there. You know, they're very close bill numbers, and I can't recall. I believe, yeah, they were introduced before the legislative session started. So, starting in early December, the legislators, House members, representatives, and senators can go and introduce a bill. And you know, I could potentially say that it was just chalked up to non-communication between the two prime sponsors, but I doubt that, looking at the number of legislators that are on this bill. But you know, theoretically, yeah, two legislators might not have spoken to each other and, you know, dropped very similar bills. So, yeah, I imagine that, you know, one of them will probably be deemed kind of a legislative term, the vehicle. So this will be the bill that will move forward. And so they'll tack on any good language in one bill, and they'll tack it on to the other bill.
What college did you go to, and what did you study for a master's?
I went a little bit different route than you know, graduating high school and going to college. A little bit of a funny story of how I ended up being a lobbyist. I hope it's a funny story. So I started out when I was in high school. I grew up in Auburn, which is, you know, the fire department that I now work for. And I thought I originally wanted to be an architect or an engineer or something like that. And as part of sophomore year, I had to go do a job shadow. And I didn't know any architects or engineers. And the school had a packet of contacts for the community that, you know, these community members had agreed to do you know, host high school students for job shadows. And there weren't any architects or engineers in that packet. So I was like, okay, well, I got to get something done here. So I was thinking, well, what would be interesting? So I called the police department and the fire department, and the fire department called me back first. So I ended up going to do a ride along when I was 14 years old with the fire department, and showed up and like, wow, this is a really cool job. This is what I want to do with my life, and kind of set a pace there. And you know, firefighting, there's actually it's a civil service position. It's low qualification ultimately. It's, for the most part, you're either 18 or 21, and you have to have a high school diploma or GED and a driver's license. A clean background certainly helps. But so I kind of took that standpoint of thinking like, oh, well, I don't need to go to college. I just need some fire department experience. And so I went to one quarter of college fresh out of high school. I went to Bellevue at the time as community college, and I didn't really know about student loans. I didn't know, you know, really anything, because that college wasn't going to be my focus. So I went to work basically, and I volunteered at a fire department. I worked for a private ambulance. I worked for a hospital for a little bit, and then I ended up getting hired with my fire department when I was 23. And we have through our collective bargaining, through our work from our union, we've negotiated to school benefits so that our firefighters can go to school, and our fire department will pay for our tuition. And once we get a degree, they'll give us a education incentive, but basically additional pay because we have a degree. Wow. So I started there at 23. I was taking classes on occasion through Bellevue Community College, mostly online. I was working on fire science degrees, and so I eventually finished that up in about 2009. I thought, okay, well, I was taking a class, you know, one class in fall quarter, then it'd be wintertime, and I'd want to go snowboarding. So I didn't want to take a class during winter, and then springtime would roll around. I'd take a class then, and then summer would roll around. I'm like, well, I don't want to take classes during the summer, and finally, I was realizing that it was going to take me forever to get my degree, so then I kind of buckled down and started taking classes nonstop, and ended up getting 2 associate's degrees from Bellevue in 2011 and then 2012, and then I transferred Arizona State University has an online program where I take the same classes that students, or I took the same classes that students were taking there. And so I ended up majoring in political science with a minor in justice studies. I graduated from there in December 2015. So while I was working at the fire department, while I was lobbying, I was going to school too. So, yeah.
How'd you get into the lobbying from the firefighters?
So kind of osmosis, I guess. So I when I got hired with the fire department, again, going back to knowing that I'd wanted to be a firefighter for a long time, I started, and City of Auburn said at the time, and this was before the recession kicked in, that they were having budget problems. And there's this new, a brand new form of government in 2006 called the Fire Authority, a regional fire authority, and basically allowed a city or a fire district to merge with another city or fire district, and then each of those jurisdictions could have elected officials on the board of a fire authority, and then they didn't have to pay for it. A city wouldn't have to pay for their own fire department. We were allowed under the fire authority to levy new additional taxes. So I got hired with Auburn, and then I show up to my first union meeting a month later, and they say that if we don't pass this fire authority initiative, that we're going to have to lay off 10 firefighters. And again, I'd known that I want to be a firefighter since I was 14. And like, are you kidding me? It's taken me this long to get this job, and now I'm going to get laid off. And so I asked what I had to do, and the answer was to get politically active. So I ended up going and knocking on people's doors and waving signs, and basically asking people for my job. And I understood at that point from firsthand experience that political action mattered, that legislative action mattered. So I started getting involved in my union, and my union's very politically active because ultimately our jobs are at stake because of elected officials and we need to try and elect people that are going to take care of firefighters. So by working through them, I was able to do a number of kind of political action things. And actually, kind of one of the highlights for me was our organization, the Washington State Council of Firefighters, partnered with the Inslee campaign in 2012. And we were the campaign drivers for Governor Inslee. So I got to drive the future governor around all across Washington State on my days off, and really got to know him and his campaign staff and his family members. And then so again, it's just kind of a slow incremental exposure to political and legislative action, and then a position came up, and I was able to start working for my union. Definitely not your traditional path to political legislative employment. So
you said you were pretty young when you wanted to go into architecture. Do you think that had you not gotten into firefighting and lobbying, would you have still wanted to do that, or did you kind of lose interest?
I think I would have still probably pursued that route. I was taking classes in high school to work towards that. I was, but I mean, that was 20 years ago now. So it's hard to think back to that.
Okay.
I'm just really confused about the background.
It's basically wallpaper where I'm in the basement of an old library at the Capitol TV studio.
This is a picture of that looks like the Senate, right? That's the Senate floor.
This is the Senate floor, Capitol, and then inside the Capitol. So.
I thought that was.
That's funny.
Is that all?
It's getting a bit hard to hear.
Speaking of the background, what party are you in?
Party am I in? So I'm going to preface it with my organization is a nonpartisan organization. We don't care what letters behind your name.
Yeah.
We just care about if you support firefighter issues and what could be done about that. On a personal basis, I would call myself a Democrat. I've got very progressive and liberal beliefs, but that's part of being a lobbyist, is having to check those beliefs and set them aside and focus on what's best for my organization. And I have to work with people that I have very large disagreements. Like I disagree with them significantly on a number of issues, but my job is to set my personal beliefs aside and do what's best for my organization.
I'm in that same position. I'm the union president for the school district, for the teachers. So I'm in the same spot where I've got lots of people I don't agree with, and they don't agree with me, but I have to put all that aside. So you put some other bills on this list that could be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to talk about any of those as a class. We'll try to do that in the next few days.
Okay.
But we are coming down to the Capitol on January 23rd.
Okay, January 23rd. All right.
And it would be awesome if we would have a chance to meet with somebody that's either, if Representative Smith's bill is the one that goes forward, it'd be super awesome to be able to meet with her. I think I mentioned to you, we have a former student who just graduated 2 years ago from this class that's a legislative assistant for her right now.
Yeah.
So
yes,
we'll
I can
talk about these other bills, see if there's any interest in any other ones.
Yeah, I can work on talking to the prime sponsors and seeing if there's a time that we can meet with them, and also your legislators from your district. I actually saw Representative Vincent Baez in the hallways yesterday, and mentioned that I'm doing Teach with TVW, and he goes, "Oh, great! I have a nephew that goes to Meridian, so that's one of the number one jobs of a legislator is to get reelected, and so they really care about the people that elect them and really care about the issues in their community. So, if you think about it, that your issues is their issues. They want to hear from you. They care about what you care about.
Cool. That automatic voter registration bill looks really interesting. You guys from that see that on the backside?
So yeah, and actually I used to be on the board of an organization called the Washington Bus. It's based out of Seattle, but it's a statewide organization that really engages young people in political action. And this was, and this still is, one of the bills that they actively work for, of making sure people have access to voting, and that when you turn 18, that you are eligible to vote right away, that you get that ballot in the mail, and so this is another one of those issues. Access to voting has been an issue that has been kind of killed in the last 5 years, because this Senate Republican caucus didn't want to move this forward despite a number of negotiations and some movement, but ultimately it died. And so voting access is a high priority for the Democratic caucuses, and I definitely anticipate that these voting bills that you see on the list I sent you will move. So I anticipate that they'll be passed out of the legislature and signed by the governor.
We might want to consider that as a class, you guys.
Are we okay for time, or I'm happy to run over? Or...
Oh yeah.
Okay. So there is another class and lobbyist that will be meeting. So I just need to wrap up so they can meet too. I guess until I talk to you in 2 weeks, is what can I do for you?
Well, I think what we'll do is first we'll decide for sure on a bill. Like if we wanted to also do one of those voter registration ones,
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll email you, let you know what our classes decided, and then whatever else we decide we want to move forward. Because I think it would be awesome. Like last year, one of the things we did was once we decided, we had students write some things about why they supported it, the bill that we did, and then we forward all that stuff to you. We did it to Dave last year, and then tried to find. Dave actually testified in one of the committees using the stuff that we had said, and he kind of put all that forward. So that would be kind of, I guess.
Okay. And a number of these bills, I think it's on the list, are being heard this upcoming week. So in the meantime, I will definitely sign in your class in favor of the net neutrality if that's what you would like me to do, and I can testify if you're able to give me some of the basically what why your class supports this, and I'm very happy to do that. Or if not, if you prefer to kind of think about some of these issues, that you can always tune into TVW online or on what I know locally here it's channel 23. I'm assuming it's probably the same up there on Comcast, but you can watch these hearings live. You can go back into their archives and watch them and see what the testimony was. You can go to the legislative website to get information about these bills. I think in the thing that I sent you, there's email links to it. And then also going through and looking at the individual pages of the bills. While there's the text of it, there's also legislative reports on it that kind of boil the law or boil the legislation down into kind of plain language. It gives you a background. It gives you what the bill will do in plain language. It's easier to read than just kind of reading through bill and referencing what RCW is out there. So,
okay, cool. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely, and thank you. I'm really excited to be working with your class.
All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Or sooner.